Good morning, good morning, good morning everybody. Maayong buntag sa tanan, naimbag, gabigat, magandang umaga sa lahat. Alam kong hindi pa kayo nakanagap ng good morning today. So ito na po yung good morning greeting ninyo. Good morning, and the morning is indeed good and beautiful and amazing. We're really, attracting positive energy here. There's so much to be thankful for because we are all gathered here virtually to have an engaging discussion on eco event production. If you have not clicked the share button on our live streams, do it now, please, because not only will it take you less than 45 milliseconds, I did my research, you also get to inform and educate your friends through this webinar. My name is Val Vestille, and I'm honored to have been invited to host and moderate this very significant event. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Young Environmental Journalists, or AYEJ. Ang misyon po namin bilang isang environmental nonprofit and startup media organization is to hashtag Let the Earth Be Heard through our different storytelling and capacity building strategies for the youth. And we will definitely let the earth be heard today as we all explore different initiatives that help promote sustainable behavior in events management. Welcome everybody to our free webinar on organizing zero waste events, brought to you by the Center for International Trade Expositions and Missions, or CITEM, the export promotion arm of the DTI. This is a pre-event in support of the upcoming Sustainability Solutions Expo, or SSX, on November 18 to 20. The SSX is a trade platform that promotes products and solutions and drives businesses to transition towards green growth. Now, why are we all here this morning? As you all know, events generate considerable waste and require significant consumption of resources, from facilities and supplies to refreshments and collaterals. And I've seen this personally pre-pandemic. I was hosting a lot of events and I saw waste left and right. And as we move towards organizing hybrid virtual and face-to-face events, because of the conundrum that is the pandemic, I don't know when this is going to end. But please know that a single event attendee can produce up to 2 kilos of waste. That's heavy. That's a lot. And 85% of it will end up in the landfills. Bad news. So that's why we're all here this morning, because creating events, initiatives, or any occasion is actually an opportunity to promote sustainable behavior, from waste management even to the treatment of suppliers of goods and services. So we're getting into action and hearing from some of the champions of zero waste and applying the learnings for eco event production. The honor of welcoming us all to this learning session lies with no less than the SSX Project Director and OIC of the Operations Group 2 for Food and Sustainability Sectors. Please give your virtual applauses for Ms. Rowena Mendoza.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rowena Mendoza, Project Director for the upcoming Sustainability Solutions Expo from the Center for International Trade Expositions and Missions. I would like to begin by acknowledging the presence of our representatives from DTI, our MSMEs and stakeholders from the food and lifestyle sectors, guests, and most especially, my dear colleagues from CITEM. Thank you for all joining us in today's event. On November 18 to 21, CITEM will launch the Sustainability Solutions Expo, or SSX, a digital event and trade promotions platform which aims to promote sustainable products and solutions to help transition businesses toward greener practices. We anticipate with optimism the staging of hybrid events beginning this year. Next year, we should start adopting more environmentally responsible practices for our trade exhibition projects, platforms, and related activities. To support the launch of SSX, CITEM is organizing a series of knowledge sharing sessions that aim to guide key stakeholders on sustainable practices, beginning with today's free webinar. Our sessions for today will help us plan, produce, and launch zero waste events. We are joined by our special guest speakers who will discuss the narrative behind zero waste practices and how these are understood, pursued, and implemented successfully. To give you a more in-depth take on these topics, allow me to introduce to you our lineup of speakers. Please welcome Akira Sakano from Zero Waste Academy, Miss Ana Oposa from Save Philippine Seas, Mr. Miss Jonas Maridumdum from Sustainable PH, and Joni Galeste from Buhay Zero Waste. Each of them will be sharing with us their own views and experiences on sustainability, planning zero waste events, and circular business models that them, along with all government and private event organizers, and even our MSMEs can adopt. Again, I'd like to thank in advance all our guest speakers for sharing their time and industry insights with us, and I hope everyone will have an interesting and engaging learning session. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. Please enjoy the rest of the webinar. Back to you, Val.
Thank you, Ms. Wang, for reminding us why we are all here this morning. Really solidifies the reason of being here. Again, for those of you settling in, welcome to a free webinar where we teach you the basics of organizing zero waste events. This is brought to you by CITEM in support of the upcoming Sustainability Solutions Expo on November. For those of you watching our Facebook live stream and those of you who are in our Hop-In virtual event thingy majig. If at any point you have questions or insights, please feel free to comment them down to our speakers, to our organizers, and we will do our best to entertain them when the time comes later on in the program. Let's get the ball rolling, shall we? To kick off our lineup of presentations and learning inputs, this morning is a keynote address that will attempt to demystify the world of zero waste and share how a small town achieved Japan's first fully zero waste habitation. This, I was told, is the first time she is speaking in the Philippines virtually for a Filipino audience. I'm so excited. Our speaker is the founder and director of Zero Waste Japan and is the chair of the board of directors of Zero Waste Academy in Japan, served to spread the zero waste community building concepts all over the world and showcased how a small town could be a model of change to the world. Since 2020, she has helped deliver planning and implementation of zero waste policy and projects to local governments, communities, and businesses in Japan and elsewhere. She's a global shaper of the World Economic Forum from 2012 to 2020 and a co-chair of the World Economic Forum Annual Meeting 2019. I just lost my breath. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Akira Sakano for her keynote address, Zero Waste Demystified.
Magandang umaga and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me for this session this morning. I'm Akira Sakano from Zero Waste Japan. I'm very happy to be actually virtually back to the Philippines. I actually have 2 years of working experience in the Philippines back in around 2012. Of course, before joining this zero waste movement myself. So I'm really happy to share our knowledge, and so that's why let me have some time a little bit to share my screen in the beginning. Meanwhile, I love to introduce myself as well. So again, I'm Akira Sakano. I started working with a very small community called Kamikatsu in Japan in the mountainous area, which I'll explain a little bit further later on. And then I'm right now working through that experience to spread how zero waste can be implemented in elsewhere. So I'm currently also leading various researches and then the cooperation or the platforms with the businesses as well. So I heard this is the event organization insights providing opportunities. Well, I don't really deep dive into the event organization itself from my presentation. I believe that zero waste elements can be learned from community building procedure, which I'm practicing right now, into individual actions for the organization actions or any kind of coordination actions. So I really hope that you can take away something from my presentation. So first of all, I'm part of this Zero Waste Japan as an organization right now. I founded this just 2 years ago after I left the small community I've been working with to spread the idea of zero waste. But for us, I just want to start with like how I define the approach of zero waste. So this is not just about 100% recycling the waste or how we manage sustainable resources and so on. But we see the waste as the error or the system failure for the designs or the systemic socioeconomic systems. So for us, I see fixing the error is exactly what we are doing in the social system or economic systems. So from that viewpoint, we also look at, for example, our habits or the supply chains or anything from the systemic perspectives. So even for the waste, we always talk about how we can treat better the waste, how we can recycle better the waste. But at the same time, we also need to look into the sources of where it's coming from, which we need to talk about the waste prevention aspects. So of course, regarding the events, we of course need to talk about how we can treat it better, but we also need to talk about how we can source things better. So I'd like you to have this both perspective in the beginning to talk about the waste in general. So as our organization, Zero Waste Japan, we work mainly for local governments and communities to support them building their own policy and then systems or any kind of projects in the ground, and then to engage also the businesses in the local community level as well as nation or the global level to partner with local communities or the regions to implement more sustainable and more zero waste supply chains, and then we develop products around that to support as like tool providers for them as well. So that's our daily work. And then for today, as an intro, I'd like to explain a little bit further about my experience in a very small town, or you might call it village, in Japanese mountainous area. So the town is called Kamikatsu. You might have seen the video or anything. So if you're interested to deep dive into the story of this town, please, you can search about Kamikatsu Zero Waste and you can find lots of videos online as well. But I moved into this town back in 2014 and then had been working with them over 5 years. So as you can see, this really looks like some areas in the Philippines as well. So I hope you can relate somewhat. So I worked there with this kind of very small community, with the population is very small. Of course, they have less and less people right now. This is actually the overall situation in rural Japan, that we have less population. Aging population is, of course, increasing. And then, for example, in Kamikatsu's case, more than half of the population is above the age of 65 years old. So this is really challenging in terms of that demographic situation as well. At the same time, since they are located in the very mountainous, remote area, of course, the accessibility for the supply chains for any direction, of course, purchasing, but of course, for the disposing and stuff, that's also the challenging. But this town or the village, Kamikatsu, is actually the first municipality in Japan to declare for the zero waste ambition back in 2003 as a municipal office. So that was really very new concept in that time in Japan as well. Overall, globally, this zero waste concept or zero waste declaration practices done by the municipal governments started around the year of 2000, and then it spread around the world as a concept, how we can reduce waste, not just manage waste. So the Kamikatsu's zero waste declaration actually aimed to achieve zero waste or zero waste sent to landfill or incineration by 2020, which just passed a year ago. So I'd like to talk about what was the success with that, and then what's the reasons behind, and what are the challenges they faced. So Kamikatsu, they started the waste management, I would say, in the very beginning, back in 90s. But before then, similar to most of the areas who has challenges with the waste management, they were doing the open dumping and the open incineration. So burning waste in the open air. So of course, it produced lots of pollutions. And then of course, the view in the mountainous area, like having all the smokes and all the waste that piling up, was very not the nice thing to see. But overall, Japanese government started to ban the open incineration. And then, of course, all the municipalities were mandated to implement proper waste management facilities and schemes. But in Japan, municipal governments are the ones who's responsible for managing household waste and then general business waste. So which means municipalities are responsible for having enough financing for it. And then they have to have the location to put any kind of facilities for waste management, which is normally a very challenging aspect as well, because no one wants the waste management facility nearby your place in general. At the same time, of course, you need to have the resources to manage the facilities and so on. So that's why for such a small municipality like Kamikatsu, it had been a challenge to gain all the resources to start doing proper waste management. But of course, since it's mandated, so they had to do something. So they set up small-scale incinerators, like 2 of them, to just start burning waste in the incinerator instead of open air. But right after that, in overall Japan, we had huge issue and discussions surrounding the air pollution and then the effect of that for our health conditions. Namely, the dioxin was the main target, the component of how it's badly influencing our health. And then the national government started to implement more strict regulation regarding the incinerators' functional criteria. So that's why actually that small scale incinerator didn't meet that criteria. So that's why they had to shut them down. So now the municipality faced the choices between whether they're going to rebuild bigger facility versus anything else. So since, of course, with the limitation of the budget and limitation of all the resources, the municipal government decided to focus, instead of building new facilities and invest more finances in it, because it's limited, they started to think around, if we cannot build the facilities, what are the way around? So that was how everything started. So actually in Japan, the general waste segregation criteria is called burnable or non-burnable. So all the waste management streams in Japan are built upon the system of incineration. So that's why we are just looking at the waste from that systemic point of view, that is it burnable, or can we just dump it into the incinerator or not? But if you start looking at waste from different perspectives of, is it recyclable or not? Or even, is it still reusable? Or is it still, can we use it or not? So from that perspective, we basically rebuild the system of waste management in Kamikatsu. So what it means is that, so basically Kamikatsu started not using incinerator, but how can we reduce the waste going to the incinerators? So we implemented various situations, but just to explain, there are 2 points that we want to highlight if we ever call it Kamikatsu model. The first point is that we first really focus on the engagement of the residents. So instead of municipal government just providing any facilities and say that, this is how we're going to do it, we engaged residents for them to participate as a part of the important role of the system. And then we also utilized the system of the station system, which means that we utilize one community location to centralize lots of the functions of community functions in one location, and then utilize that one location as kind of the hub for implement different strategies. So I'll talk a little bit further about what it means, but let me explain through what is the actual projects or how things are implemented. So for that implementation, just to introduce, there are 3 elements are very important. First is the contractors or the recyclers. As you can imagine, if we want to start recycling instead of burning, of course, you need to have the partner to recycle. I'll explain further later. But secondly, also, of course, municipality needs to take decisions where to allocate budget, what to prioritize. So, of course, that decision-making mattered, right? Then the third point is the, this is kind of like broad way to say, but like in the objective way to say it is the characteristics of the residents, how to understand, how to make it in the way of making policy to be engaged more. Is the third part. But anyway, I'll explain later in more details. So in Kamikatsu, instead of utilizing the facility of high-tech incineration, what they took was to have a location of waste collection center. So they asked, the municipal office asked all the residents to bring their waste to one location. And then that's the beginning of the waste segregation. So when residents brings in, they separate waste into different categories at the collection center, supported by the ground management people. So that bringing in system was how first the municipality started to first, of course, engage the residents, at the same time also to cut the cost, because running the trucks, especially in the mountainous area, are very challenging as well. At the same time, since we have many elderly people living in the area, and then you can see the roads are still, I'm not sure your image of Japan, but we still have lots of locations in the rural area, in the mountainous area like this. And then this is really the gap between Tokyo and then the rural area as well. But yes, we need to have the backup for the elderly living in such area. So we had backup system for the on-spot collection instead of kind of pushing them for bringing into the waste collection center. But anyway, so with that, having one location as a hub and then having a backup system, we started to collect all the waste into one location. So to recycle, of course, we need to segregate the waste into proper categories so that the recyclers can handle it better in better quality for recycled products. So actually, this is one of the most famous part of our system, but we set in the end 45 categories of waste segregation. We started with 9 categories, raised up into 22, 34, and then now officially 45. But this was based on finding the right recyclers, finding the details of what are the best way for the recyclers to handle. So we keep the quality from our end so that we can turn it over to the recyclers for them to handle it easier than mixed waste. So why 45 categories? So basically, as I mentioned, this is really just considering the handling of the recyclers, because since the amount of the waste from such a small town is limited, even as a production of the waste, because of the population number. And then with that, of course, for the recyclers, they don't have any sense to just come and collect such smaller amount with they need to drive far away. So that's why we had to make the quality very high to gain the cooperation or collaboration from the recyclers. So understanding your stakeholders, first of all, who you need to be engaged to make your system happen, and then understanding their needs and then try to provide the quality beyond their needs is definitely the way to engage the stakeholders. That's one element. Maybe you can look into it. The other elements here is that within Kamikatsu, as you might have seen, it's in the mountainous area. Basically, everyone practices like gardening or like small scale farming in their household level. So we implemented our own composting system at household level. So all the organic waste are not even collected in Kamikatsu, and then they are all composted at home. So as a municipal government, instead of collecting organic waste, they set the subsidy for the residents to buy or implement composting system or these kind of small machines, so that they could actually compost at home and utilize the fertilizers into their own soil. This was also based on the calculation between or the cost of collection and incineration versus the subsidy for implementing these small machines. And then it made so much sense just to subsidy for the machines, because more than 30% of the household waste is consists of organic waste. And then with that amount going to incinerator, of course, we have so much amount to burn. At the same time, more than 90% of the organic waste is basically water. So burning water doesn't make any sense. And then actually, to be frank, in many incinerator plants, actually they are adding oils, and then they actually need to have plastics to be burned together with organic waste to just raise up the heat or the temperature to function the incinerator. So this is really making no sense, because you need to have all the waste to be pulled into the incinerator, and then you need additional to burn organic waste, while the organic waste can be just put into water and soil. So then the key elements, as I said, the station was really a big key, because everyone produces waste. So everyone comes to that specific location in a community. And then that doesn't just make people bring the waste, but also since people meet each other at the waste collection center, and then they start randomly talking. So actually the waste collection center, normally considered as dirty, smelly, you don't want to go nearby the waste collection locations. But actually in Kamikatsu, what was significantly different was that the waste collection center doesn't smell, first of all, because we don't collect organic waste, and people, clean up the waste before bringing here. And then on top of that, since people gather here to bring their waste, actually the waste collection center became the location in the community that the most people visit within the community. So instead of municipal office or schools or hospitals or anywhere else, this is the most visited location in the community. And then therefore, the informations are gathered here the most as well. So it became a community location or community center as a function instead of just the waste collection center. So that's why knowing that kind of sub-functions of that station, we started to add lots of different other functionalities here. So one of them was the reuse shop. So instead of just letting people bring in the waste, this is a uniqueness of definition of the waste as well, but to bring in something that they don't need anymore, but still functionable for others to use. So this was the reuse shop. We call it kurukuru shop. Kurukuru means circular in Japanese. So then anyone who wants something from there can take away it for free. So it really started to circulate the products within the community. Also, next to the waste collection center, we started implementing the upcycling center. So we engaged the elderly, especially the grannies, to be part of the craft person at the craft center. So they upcycle lots of different fabrics, especially. So as you can see, kimono, our traditional clothes fabrics, or the carp flags, which we use like big carp fish flag for the Children's Day celebration. These kind of fabrics were so many available at the Waste Collection Center. So we utilized that and they created the products and sold, and then brought back 70 to 80% of that sales into the craft persons, namely the grannies, who really wanted to have the opportunities for having their roles within the communities. Also, we started to engage businesses to utilize this zero waste or their efforts of segregating waste or considering about the waste more visible as a branding. So we started set up the zero waste accreditation system, which is to identify which shops and which cafes or restaurants in the community are practicing, of course, waste segregation, but on top of that, their efforts of reducing waste. So, of course, utilizing second-handed like these reused item is one option, but of course, also considering like local sourcing or unpacked or unpackaged sourcing and etc. So that really also unleashed the potential for local businesses to regrow in Kamikatsu. So of course we had high attention. So many people visited Kamikatsu as well. That was an ad. But at the same time, they could kind of not just brand themselves as small local nice shops in the mountainous area, but also the sustainability shops and then their practices. So just to summary up what was going on in Kamikatsu is that average Japanese recycling rate is just below 20%, while Kamikatsu went over 80%. And then of course the waste amount production per person also reduced more than half. Then this amount actually does not include organic waste. Because of course that is not counted because it's not even collected as well. And then it was also brought in the financial benefits for the municipal offices, comparing to bringing all the waste produced from Kamikatsu to incinerator. Actually, it was cut into 1/6. So yeah, that's why they now continuing the practices still, because of course building incinerator costs more, and then also bringing in incineration waste outside the municipality to let other facilities burn costs a lot as well. And on top, we also had economic benefits of visitors increased, and then that boosted before COVID more than the population number annually as well. And then also the social benefits, as I mentioned, by engaging elderly population into the roles of course, managing the waste collection center, but also upcycling craft center and stuff. That also brought in the opportunity for them to feel they belong in the community, they have roles in the community. And that was really a high motivation for them to stay healthy and then stay outside of the house to meet people and then connect with the people. So the elements of the enablers for Kamikatsu model. So I mentioned 3 points before started talking about the details, but to generalize that elements, so 3 elements are the important. First, stakeholders. So know your stakeholders to enable your system is definitely the key. Know your stakeholders inside the community, inside your organization. That is very necessary steps to take forward. Second is the policy making. So of course, someone needs to lead the policy, and then especially in the municipal level, budget allocation matters. So knowing the priority, where to locate the budget, but also not just, investing is not the only way I'm saying, but also like calculate which is more efficient in terms of, for example, burning versus composting. So that kind of policy decisions needs to be in place. So directions needs to be in place. And then, for example, in the case of event organization, for example, creating purchasing guidelines and something like that really matters as well. So a third point is the participation. How can we increase the participation of actual residents or the citizens within the community? So give them roles and then give them right motivations to be part of is a very good point to start with. But normally what I'm asked is that how can everyone in Kamikatsu being so conscious about sustainability? And my answer is, well, not everyone is conscious. So I'd say only maximum 20%, so less than 20%, are the ones in the community who are super motivated, who are really connected to the mindset of sustainability. And then we also always need to consider there are like around 10% of the people who's in the very bottom that never wants to collaborate with you. And you need to kind of accept it because they exist. So even in Kamikatsu, so for example, like one person always come to the waste collection center saying that, why do we need to do this? This should be done by the municipal government. Why you are putting the roles and, hard works to us. So that's really happening. But at the same time, the bottom line point from this element flipping around, we actually could succeed that person to bring waste to the collection center with the combination, of course, with a complaint. But anyway, that is the one we need to accept. Anyway, the point of this is the majority of the population are, over 60%, almost to 80%, are the one just unconscious and doesn't care anything. But the point is, how can we make right system, or how can we design the system to engage them and then let them act like someone who's practicing with the right mindset. So that's why this system design or the model design is really the key. So of course, in the end, education is really important. So I do education a lot as well. At the same time, education doesn't always move people from the very beginning. So actions and mindset are not always together, right? So we also need to design the action. So that's why not only just doing the education about the zero waste, sustainability, and so on, we of course implemented various systems, and one of them is about the point system. So this is really like direct incentivization, but people, when they bring certain products rightly segregated to the waste collection center, they get points, or not only about the waste segregation, but as I mentioned, the consumption side matters. So with the shops, local shops, we collaborated to implement pointing system as well for unpackaged sales or unpackaged shopping. So if the residents bring their own containers or their bags and stuff to the shops, and then if they buy without the packaging, that's the timing they can also get the points. So with that combination from approaching from the both sides, so people who wasn't being part of the segregation also got to be part of, or vice versa happened as well. And then with that, we are also asked, like, can it be replicable in other areas, especially in the cities? My answer is basically yes. So you can't just copy paste everything, because the situation of the community or the residential situation is, of course, very different in very different areas. But at the same time, you can learn the different elements from our practices as well, as I already mentioned with these 3 points. And especially in the big cities, that's the question I always get asked, that, can we do it actually in Tokyo while the community is scarce, people are too many and stuff. As long as, regarding the station model-wise, yes, if you have a small space, possible, but the space also can be designed differently. So instead of having like large location, we might be utilizing, for example, the entrance of the supermarket, but in like very various locations or something like that. And then you can design it differently based on what sort of resources we already have, who are the stakeholders engaged in your scope of the community. So that is definitely one way to look into. And then it's actually succeeding in the city area. It's just my example in the end. So this is in the one of the bigger city in Japan. It's called Ikoma City in Nara Prefecture. They started implementing the station model on the side of the road. And then they actually are succeeding right now with people's participation, because they really wanted to communicate with the people. And for example, kids after school kind of join in to kind of stay around with other kids. And then so that's not only functioning again as waste collection location, but for gathering people, even selling some local products and so on. And then they actually did the trials. Sorry, this is only Japanese, but basically some, how do I say? So more than 74% of the residents said that they actually reduced the incineration waste from this trial, even in the city. And then more than 70% of the people started to consider more about the community just by doing this station-based model. And then more than 40, like almost 50% of the people, they started to think more about they want to be engaged in the community work after being part of this. So these kind of like additional benefits, not only just reducing waste, happen by designing the right community-based system. So now we are working with different municipalities as Zero Waste Japan. So for example, this is slightly larger city as well. We are working with the vision creation of the community with the local residents. At the same time, plotting project that the residents want to create in the city. And then we are the one also supporting them to implement local projects that are related to zero waste or resource circulation. Or we also work directly with the municipal government to implement the zero waste policies, from the researches, planning, and project building to implementation. So right now, actually, I'm also in this this community called OBSE right now. And then we will be having a very basic waste composition research and so on from next week. So just as highlights, so to implement zero waste actions in the individual level or the organizational level or even at the event level, the first step definitely is to know your waste. And then, as I repeatedly said, know your existing local stakeholders and resources. And then also consider, instead of just straight going to how can we recycle and so on, unlock the reuse potentials. So building capacity of how we can reuse items within this certain scale, how can we do repairing, upcycling, and so on. And then also mine what's not utilized within the community. So people resources were one of the cases in Kamikaze as well, like elderly population were also considered as mined resources, which were not fully utilize that potential as well. And also the point is creating as small loop as possible. And then you're finding your partner in the local scale really matters to close the loop within the community as well. And then just to also highlight the locality matters wise, original zero waste policy concept, which was mentioned by Reuben Murray back in around 2000. He was the economist, and then he really compared the economic aspects of between implementing such localized zero waste concept versus building high-tech incinerator in the municipal level. And then they said, he said that localizing and empowering the local people to have their own local power to implement such zero waste practices, even from the economic perspective, really has a benefit. So he said, like for L as a concept, which is one to make it or keep it local and then keep it low cost. So consider not just high tech is connected from this way. Of course, like implementing technology nowadays is really one of the solution, but at the same time also consider low technology is really a big solution to be creative as well. And then also consider the low impact within the community as well. And then, so I was asked to also talk about the situation in the Philippines, which will be talked from the other speakers for sure. But basically to consider about nationwide situation, same in Japan. Like if we talk about the nationwide, how can we implement your concept in the bigger scale? But basically my answer is going back to the local again, because situation in the local community, especially same in Japan and in the Philippines, different islands and different community, different regions has different culture, different socioeconomic background, different resources. So localize to make the maximum of what's happening in the local. So to scale that based on the small community concept, then that is the fastest way, from my opinion, to transition from local and to the linear model, to the zero waste or circular model, especially in the case of countries like us, which are kind of smaller community based and then allocated spreadly within the country. So that's why empowering local really matters. And then that's how you can look into not only like regional or geographical locations, but also as an organization. And then, for example, if you're holding an event, of course, the event itself, but how's that event surrounding communities or surrounding areas can be impacted or can be engaged. So that is the way to look at this. So thank you very much for listening my long presentation. Sorry for being long. And then I really hope you enjoy the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Akira. That was incredible. I can only look forward to the day when I hear and learn about a municipality and city here in the country that can proudly report about being a zero waste municipality, just like Kamikatsu. It was incredible. You know, Akira had mentioned some key elements and components of their initiative, from collection to recycling to composting to stations to stakeholders and branding. And I think one of the most important takeaways I got from the presentation was the part on community engagement and the participation of its residents and citizens. Sometimes the movements of zero waste feel so detached to the community that is part of it. So that was definitely worthwhile to mention and something we can only hope to model in today's time. I also find the motivation pyramid of residents very interesting. That would be helpful to engage and partake in, maybe an action research here in the Philippines. Now, the only challenge now, as you said, really is to keep it, and I like how you said it, to keep it local and to keep it low cost. I think there's also an added challenge to make governments believe that the benefits really outweigh the costs as well. That's a lot of takeaways from me. Thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise, Akira, all the way from Japan. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. I don't know if I said that right, but thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. Up next is our learning session, which is going to kickstart our mind setting on how to create waste-free events. Our next speaker is a multi-hyphenated advocate who is best known for being the executive director and chief mermaid of Save Philippine Seas, a movement to protect the Philippines' coastal and marine resources by empowering citizens towards collective action and behavior change. She has been at the forefront of various projects and campaigns for shark conservation, environmental education, and waste management. Anna works with legislators, community leaders, and businesses with a vision to be able to dive in waste-free seas. I also want to dive in waste-free seas as well. She's passionate about puns, punctuation marks, lipsticks, and wears sunscreen every day. Please give it up for a dear friend of mine, Anna Oposa.
Thank you so much, Val, for that energetic introduction so early in the morning. So, hi everyone, I'm Anna Oposa. I'm Executive Director and Chief Mermaid of Save Philippine Seas. And in the last 10 years that we've been around, we've organized so many kinds of events. And we also realized that wastes produce a lot of events produce a lot of waste. Earlier, Val said in the introduction that he wishes that there were zero waste cities in the Philippines. And I want to share that there is actually a project in the Philippines that are transitioning cities into zero waste. Of course, it's been very challenging when you look at the way our local governments are set up. But I'm waiting for my presentation to be projected. Yes, there we go. So I'll take you through some steps on or some tips on having waste-free events based on our experience. But first, I want you to reminisce a little bit and think about what's the last pre-pandemic event that you attended? I'm sure you remember this. Mine was a talk um, in this conference hall in Makati, and there were like 70 people. I don't, that's probably the last time I was with more than like 8 people in one room. But it looks very different. So tell me in the chat what the last pre-pandemic event you attended. And for sure, there was a lot of food, as Filipino gatherings always have, diba? We always love to eat and eat with each other. There were probably giveaways, some useless most of the time, diba? They give like, well, I think that's changing, but for a time we received a lot of useless giveaways. Now, I want you to think about the last pandemic event you attended in person or in real life. Mine was very small. It was open air, and at most of the prep was digital, so we didn't receive like invitations. And some of the giveaways we got were like gift certificates, so that we wouldn't have anything to touch. So, syempre, ibang-iba na. Events now look very different. There have been many events that I've been to in the last few months na they send you something. Recently, for my cousin's wedding, she sent us cocktail kits so that we could make cocktail kits together. Um, but it's in our nature as human beings to gather, whether in person or apart. So whether it's now or 4 years from now, we are going to continue gathering. And that's why this kind of topic is still important to talk about, even if most of us are at home and we can't celebrate and gather the way we used to. So I'll take you through some tips for waste-free gatherings. Every event has different kinds of waste. And when we think about waste, it's always usually we'll think about solid waste. But there's also water, energy, food. Ang daming nasasayang when we have events. So we can't just think about solid waste and plastic, but also the energy and the water, other resources that we consume when we have waste. The most important part of having a waste-free event is definitely the event preparations. So now, medyo gets na natin that we can invite and we can do a lot of things digitally or in a paperless way. So invites are becoming email or and then we also don't send a lot of stuff anymore beforehand. And now, well, of course, less and less now, but if there are out of town trips, and I'm sure you've been invited to some out of town trips, send your guests a packing list or reminders. In one wedding I attended, they said, pack your reusables. When I organized trips for my friends before, I would always say, please pack a reusable bag, a tumbler, a reusable straw. So I'm the one that reminds people to have this in the packing list. When you choose an event venue, this is very crucial. And we have a lot of considerations when we work with an event venue. So we try to look for a venue that integrates eco-friendly practices. So they do their own practices to reduce waste. So for example, yung events nila, they won't serve condiments in sachets. But if it's hard to find, then what we do in Save Philippine Seas is we sit down with the management staff, so the hotel manager or the event manager or the venue manager, and we tell them these are our conditions. Dapat walang kunwari, walang plastic straws pag nagsiserve ng beverage, or kailangan yung food hindi naka-wrap sa plastic pag sinaserve. And we make sure we write this down, and we have a memorandum of agreement with them stating our conditions so that it's clear and everything is aligned. And if anything, if there are missteps, then we can say, oh, we agreed upon this, so this is our expectation. We in Save Philippines have a draft memorandum of agreement on our website if you would like to check it out, and use that as an inspiration for when you begin to organize events again. We are also committed to getting local suppliers, artists, and organizers, especially if you're having like a wedding or a big event. And this not only supports the local industry, so you support local talent, but of course you reduce your carbon footprint because people won't have to travel far just to get to that place. And traveling inevitably creates waste, whether that's your carbon footprint flying on a plane or traveling by car or by vehicle. And if there is an event venue that is different from, let's say, where people are staying, make sure that you have a schedule so that they travel in groups. This is also actually fun because, well, for me, I'm an extrovert and I like meeting strangers. So when I'm in a vehicle with strangers, I like to talk to them and get to know them and how they know the people who organize the event. So this is not just a way to reduce your carbon footprint, but also get to know the people that you're going to the event with. And now, since we have a pandemic going on, it would be helpful to have sanitizing stations for guests. I think now everyone carries around a bottle of sanitizer, but if you want extra an extra thing for your guests, then you can have refilling stations for them in case na ubusan sila ng sanitizer during that day. Another big topic when it comes to events is food and beverage. Like I said earlier, mahilig tayo kumain. Filipinos love to eat together. We love to drink together. And food and beverage, when we talk about it, ang dami talagang food waste. And in the Philippines, this has been one of our biggest problems. There's a disconnect between how much food we waste and how many people are hungry. So in events, we encourage, of course, it depends on the event, on the nature of the event, but we encourage our participants to, of course, bring their own reusables. And if hindi naman, kunwari, hindi siya maganda aesthetically for people to be bringing their own bottles, again, it depends on the nature of the event, then have it in glasses. Serve your drinks in glasses. We also ask our suppliers not to serve water or any kind of drink in plastic bottles, especially if we know that there aren't recycling facilities in the area. And we ask them to remove the plastic cups and straws from the bar or from the beverage station. And we make sure that we provide water refilling stations around the area in key locations around the area. When you're choosing seafood, it's crucial that you try to support the local fisher folk or the local fishing industry and choose seafood that's in season. So ask around when you're there, ano ba yung isda na in season, so that we're not disrupting any kind of pattern. And the funny thing is, I'm actually allergic to seafood, but this is important for us to make sure that we're supporting the local fisher folk and supporting sustainable fisheries as well. Another big topic, which I guess now is not, this is a challenging topic to discuss because we don't have a policy in the Philippines yet. There have been drafts. I've read the drafts for this on food banks. So yung food waste dadalhin sa food bank and then it gets distributed to people who need it. But have a plan for food waste. The most important tip is to make sure that you set the number of people attending and make sure the food is enough for them. In our events, we usually have a lot of young people in our events, so we're not so food waste has never been a problem. Let's just put it that way. And pag may leftover sa meals, we keep it in the buffet table because eventually people are gonna get hungry a few hours later and will want to eat something. But if there's a way for you as event organizers to make sure that the food gets donated somewhere, but of course you have to check the hygiene uh, issues there and check liability kasi nga may rules on that, or if it can be composted. So check if may composting na ginagawa yung venue where you are. Some of the big hotels have, and I've seen hotels that have a composting facility. So make sure you check. Next, let's talk about decorations, gifts, and giveaways. I think this is one of the most wasteful aspects of an event. If possible, rent decorations instead of buying. This is becoming a more popular practice, but if there's a very specific theme and you need to buy, you can make it available for family and friends to rent or to give them for the future. So make sure that it can go somewhere, or if you're renting, then that will be much better. And event organizers do have contacts for this. For me, when when my friends have parties and I like something, I always say, "Can I borrow that for this future event?" So it keeps things in use longer. That's why I never have events with like balloons, because it's really just one time use. Another tip is if you have, for example, a birthday party, a baptism, wedding, have a registry for gifts. Why is this important? So that you don't duplicate, and also you get things that you actually want and that you'll actually use. So if possible, have a gift registry. Another another tip is to choose seasonal flowers and foliage. This is so obviously because of Instagram, malaking thing yung styling, diba? Tapos pagandahan ng flowers. But a lot of the flowers that we use in the Philippines for events are most likely not grown here. I went to an event na imported pa from Holland yung flowers, and I was just thinking in my, of course I didn't say this out loud, but I was thinking like ang intense ng carbon footprint nung bulaklak. I mean, it looked gorgeous, but then at what expense, right? So that's something that we have to also consider. The Philippines is actually fifth in the world in terms of plant diversity, meaning in terms of the number of plants that we have, bongga talaga yung rating ng Pilipinas. So why don't you make your event a way to showcase how beautiful our country is by using local flowers and foliage. Another important tip is not to use shells, corals, sea stars or starfish, and sand as souvenir decor. So using corals and sand is actually illegal, so we shouldn't be doing it in the first place. For shells, there are shells that are protected, but I would just advise not to do it. Just get replicas or things that are made out of resin, because even if a shell doesn't have an animal inside anymore, it still has a purpose in the ecosystem. Same with sea stars. Magpagawa na lang kayo ng resin or bilhin na lang kayo sa online shops ng mga reusable ones that and made out of it can be made out of plastic or resin, as long as it's not the real thing, because they belong to the environment. And then remove rice, confetti, fireworks, and lanterns from your celebration. Dahil sa Tangled, nauso yung mga lantern na nire-release both in the air and in the water, but those are very wasteful and they're also a fire hazard. We have a campaign against balloon releasing as well and lantern releasing called Defying Gravity. So we have a toolkit for that. If you want to check it out, it's on our website, savephilippineseas.org/resources. Rice, it feels unethical to throw rice, to throw bigas in a country where there's a lot of hunger. And then confetti, of course, is just going to become waste. We suggest using bubbles instead. Cute siya sa photos, and you're not creating any solid waste out of it. Make giveaways optional. when we started out in events, when we would have events, we would always have different kinds of giveaways. So merong syempre tote bag, you have your t-shirt, you have, the usual, I guess, expectations that we have for events. But more and more, we realize that it's actually really wasteful. And how many tote bags do you need? 'Di ba? I mean, at some point, basura na talaga siya, and you can only, dalawa lang naman yung arms mo, diba? So parang how many tote bags can you carry at the same time? So now we like one of our last events, we took away the tote bags, and we instead shifted to packing cubes, at least mas useful siya. And then for shirts, we never put the date of the shirts, and we design it in a way that hindi siya mukhang event shirt. Does that make sense? Like, hindi nakalagay yung name ng event, yung date, yung organizer. We try to make it like a statement tee so that pwede mo pa siyang gamitin. So, for example, in our sea camps, nakalagay, proud Filipino citizen. We call our community citizens. For our shark summit many years ago, we put anak ng pating, and then we had like cartoon sharks there so that hindi siya dated and you can still use it. And we now ask so now we're organizing an online event, and we're sending out tokens to the resource speakers as to thank them for their time. But now we're making it optional. So we're asking them, do you want this? Will you have use for this? And if not, we're not going to send you one. We'll just send you something else, like a digital gift card. So some other tips that we would like to give you. If there's a fundraising component to your event, try to allocate something for a cause. One of the sweetest things that someone has ever did for SPS, yung isang wedding, di ba when they dance, when a couple dances and people like pin money on them? Sounds so strange, right? So they donated part of that. This newlywed couple, donated a part of that to Save Philippine Seas, and it enabled us to buy snorkeling sets for kids. And we took them out snorkeling, and it's just a nice way to start your marriage by doing something meaningful, and that it's something meaningful that will have a ripple effect on other people and communities. Right now, a lot of digital events, which I appreciate na pag may digital event, magpapadala ng food, magpapadala ng snacks. So if you're doing that, then make sure that you try to order from a local business, somewhere that's nearby. We all know that restaurants are really struggling to stay alive during the pandemic. So if you can support local businesses, then please do that. And then make a note to remove the utensils. This is in some of the food delivery apps, naka-default siya na hindi ilalagay, but sometimes the restaurant owners or the delivery people are not so mindful of this. But if you write it down as a note or you remind them, then it can be more part of their practices. And always be a waste watcher. By taking stock of your waste, you can assess what to reduce. So in Save Philippine Seas, we created what we call a waste watch report card, where you can audit your waste in an event. So at the end of the event, you can look and see, okay, pinakamarami nating waste, for example, paper napkins. Or I'm trying to think about, we have such low waste events that I don't really think about what we produce, but it's a lot of like paper, kunwari. So by knowing what you are by knowing what waste you're producing, then you can take steps and reflect on how to reduce it. Diba? You cannot, what's that quote? You cannot manage what you cannot measure. So make sure that you are measuring it and keeping track of that. And then bring your waste to drop-off points. This is more common in Metro Manila. We have what we call waste aggregators or drop-off points. So there are collection points in a lot of cities in Metro Manila and around Metro Manila. There is a campaign now called Plastic Drop PH, hashtag Plastic Drop PH. We are looking for collection points outside Metro Manila to make sure that we're building this map of drop-off points around the Philippines. So check that out if there is a drop-off point near you. Right now, I'm practicing that on my own as an individual, and I'm going to do that this afternoon, actually. So I collect all my waste and dry them and clean them, and then bring them to the nearest junk shop or waste drop-off point in your area. So when you're planning your venue, you can also search for that. And then make sure you give feedback to your suppliers. So give them a virtual pat on the back. I am known for writing letters. And whenever I have a good experience or a not so good experience, I make sure to reach out to the staff directly to say, I loved your practice of doing this, keep it up. Or is there a way that we can reduce this type of waste? And that's so important because we never really tell them, we never really like communicate these, and they have to be encouraged to continue. They don't know what they don't know, right? So make sure that we communicate these as guests to them. And I'll leave you with this final thought, which is take problems of the environment seriously, but never yourselves. What do I mean by this? Yes, we want to have waste-free events, but as a guest, you also have to think about your guests. No one wants to go to an event and be lectured at what things they're doing wrong. So it's okay to be, environmental, but it's not okay to be self-righteous kasi yung guest mo, maiinis lang sa'yo. So when you're planning the event, meron tayong tinatawag na behavioral nudges. So you make these waste-free practices built into the design of the event so that it feels natural and it feels intuitive. Kung mahirap kasi siya and you're burdening your guests, nakaka-stress as an organizer and nakaka-stress as a guest. So make sure from planning to the very end, it's intuitive, it's seamless, and you are thinking about the experience as someone who is attending the event. So that wraps up my talk, and I'll give you some more tips. If you download the events guide and other toolkits, we have them all on safephilippineseas.org. They're all for free. I mentioned the memorandum of agreement that we had earlier, that we have a sample of that. And we also have this guidebook where we list out more tips. So I hope that you learned something and you continue to make waves with us in the events that you plan in the future. Thank you so much for listening and spending your morning. I turn it over again to Val.
Thank you so much to our chief mermaid. It's always a good time listening and learning from you, Tita A. And I have taken lots of notes because we will be implementing that in our programs as well, so that we can also lessen our waste and give our own contributions. And I think a lot of you listening from Facebook and or Hop In can mirror and replicate the different key points and insights from Ana Oposa. It was very easy. We did not need to do so much research to do the things that she said. It was so actionable. It was so practical. And we hope that you took the necessary notes to be able to replicate them into your programs and projects as well. Thank you so much once again, Ana, for that. For this part in the program, we will be heading on over to our panel discussions. We will be having back our speaker, Ana, and we will have two additional panelists who we believe are trailblazers in their own rights with the work that they do in zero waste movements. We will get some inspiration from them. We have Joni Galeste of Buhay Zero Waste, the largest zero waste Facebook group, which is a great platform for everyone listening as a starting point in your zero waste journey. We also have JM Dumdum of Sustainable PH. Sustainable PH started out as a blog by Colleen Davila Palaganas, but now has become a stronger community in young people, professionals, and practitioners wanting to take a leap. Let's have everyone on the virtual stage, please, for a panel discussion. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us, and let's begin our panel discussion. Hello to everyone. Hi, once again, Anna, Joni, JM, thank you for being with us. And let's get the ball rolling with our panel discussion. Our first questions. We have collated some questions from our hop-in comments as well as our Facebook live stream comments, and we will be attending to them in a while. Just to get the ball rolling, we have a question here for agencies with decades worth of processes. How can we start to embed the zero waste mindset among the workforce and apply zero waste practices in our processes? Maybe we can start with Anna.
I was gonna say, huwag muna ako kasi kanina pa ako nagsasalita.
Oh nga. Sige, I'll give you a quick break, Anna. I'll come back to you. I'll circle back to you.
Thanks.
And go to Joni first. We're talking about processes here, and long-standing processes, and long-standing processes means long-standing mindsets. How do you suppose we can change mindsets as we transition to a more zero waste way of thinking in terms of organizing events? Yes, Joni.
So for me, because I'm a ballet dancer and I also do like commercial shoots, I do like basically performing arts. So when we do events in the morning palang, we'll have, and this was pre-pandemic, even pre-pandemic, they would give us a food container. Tapos sometimes the rice, like our breakfast would be wrapped in plastic, pa nakabalot. The ulam would be in plastic. Nakalagay siya sa plastic container. We'd have plastic spoons, plastic fork, and then we would have our coffee with a plastic lid, cup, the sleeve, tapos meron pang plastic water bottle. And then by lunchtime, we would have the exact same thing, minus the coffee, merienda meron na naman, dinner meron na naman. And this is like times 50. So when you see the amount of waste collected in one day, parang that kind of gives you, parang it kind of shocks you. Because like, for example, with households, usually it's, oh, I throw my waste away, out of sight, out of mind. But when you see it all together na napuno siya in one day, parang that's a little, that takes you back. Parang, oh, that's a lot of waste. So what we used to do is eventually, because someone called, like, and it started with me, it was really just, hi guys, I'm concerned. I'm a performer, but I also teach zero waste. So I brought it up with like the directors, with the producers. Are there things we can do to like lessen it a bit? And this is coming from just one person. So eventually, like even for coffee, we would have, like we were required to bring our own containers for coffee. And then we would just have a coffee pot. Now we could refill anytime we wanted to. There was a buffet table, and we had to bring our own containers, we had to bring our own utensils. But for bigger events, you can have, because we've also done this also, since right now everyone is also tested before the event. Parang naka-buffet type na lang siya. And then you have the utensils at the side and everything is washed. A lot of people also think kasi na we're wasting water because we have to wash everything after. So it's a lot of waste. But actually, when you produce your containers, when you produce plastic utensils, the water bottles, they use up so much water to just produce something. Tapos magiging solid waste pa siya. So parang double whammy, as opposed to just washing it at the end of the day. So I think it's really kind of figuring out how much waste you're producing, not just the waste that you see, but what goes into production as well. So sometimes it takes one person to voice that out. And, hey, can we do something about it? Sometimes it comes from the top. So it really depends on the event as well. But since we're all here, and I'm sure that there are people who are joining events or who are event organizers as well, parang they'll take initiative na din.
Thank you for that, Joni. So you said it's really about knowing how much waste you're producing, and I think that's awareness is a key step in trying to change mindset. JM, how about you?
Well, I come from an institutional perspective because Sustainable PH is basically formed by sustainability practitioners both in the environmental, social, and in corporate. So from the viewpoint of corporate sustainability, what we would usually tell companies or anyone that would create events, that have a system already in place that's for years, is to make them realize that there are benefits, to give them the mindset that there are opportunities as well as risks when you do something that's more like what we call business as usual. From there, we could then introduce them to you know tools that are out there in the internet. And one of the things that I just came out of my mind is this resource efficiency tool that it's being developed by I think it's the UN Environment Program and the Philippine Center for Environmental Protection and Sustainable Development. So that tool basically just puts in everything from energy to waste to water, and you could use that tool to really track the emissions, waste, water, and so on that any institution in MICE or in the hotels or in restaurants, because it's already there. And then once you already tracked at least, I don't know, 3 months, the first 3 months of your consumption, then you would think, okay, you can look at you can see where it's going. Then you can possibly track what are the opportunities that are out there. It could be as simple as that. So it's actually in line with what Anna said. Actually, when she said that you need to track your everything. So
when you're up against corporations, these are like big giants. You're trying to change the mindsets and processes of these corporations, and you said you make them realize the benefits of following zero waste practices in the processes. Just a follow-up question, something I thought about. What are the benefits that you always communicate? What's the first benefit you communicate with these corporations when you say, okay, do a zero waste practice or process, and this is just the benefit that you get? Number one, what's always the first thing that you communicate with these corporations? Jay?
Actually, you could just boil it down to two: increased efficiency and decrease in cost. So when you say increase in efficiency, you mean that you don't need to pay a lot of money to send your waste to haulers. You increase efficiency by reducing your energy consumption. You increase your efficiency by making sure that water that it should, before it would be wasted, would be utilized over and over. For example, in like events that are requiring lots of water, like swimming pools, for one. So all of it is tied to cost. If you're going to have a lot of waste, you're going to have a lot of cost. So reducing cost, increases efficiency, makes the company happy.
I love that mention of cost, because our next question later will be about costs. But before that, Anna, you work a lot with governments. In fact, we partnered with Sipalay on the zero waste project that we had with the USAID. So you've worked with governments, you've spoken with governments, and these are agencies with decades worth of processes. How have you navigated around that, and how do you think that mindset could be changed from that government institutional level, Anna?
That's a great question. When I started working with governments 10 years ago, I guess it was also because I was starting out, but I was very impatient and I couldn't, and I would get frustrated easily. Na this is so simple. Why don't you get it? And what I've realized is, if you want to be in sustainability for the long game, then you have to be patient, because if you're going against practices that have been there for a long time, you're really not going to get change overnight. And one motto I have always is, we win in inches. I always have to remind myself, we win in inches, because the change is so incremental that sometimes it's disheartening. And then you have moments, I have moments I look back and I was like, oh, 10 years ago we couldn't do that. And then now people get it. Diba? So it just takes a lot of patience and constant communication why you're asking for this. So for me, I will never, post something online that I haven't spoken to with that person directly. So if I posted something about, let's say, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, I have talked to the person who I've addressed that letter to and said and communicated that this is why we should be doing this and how can we work together to achieve this outcome. Because I realized also that you can call people out, but it's more important to call them in. So just because you want something, you have to understand also where other people are coming from. It's been an exercise in patience and listening also.
Yeah. So it's
Value cut out a little bit. You're frozen.
internet connection. Yeah, am I back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Audio wise.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
While we're waiting
Yes,
for Val to while we're waiting for Val to continue. Okay, I think you're back.
I know Anna will co-host with me.
I know, I
So
was like, magmo-moderate na ba ako?
Oh, if anything happens, Anna, you got me. I know.
Okay.
Yeah, apologies. Let's let me just change
Okay.
internet.
Sige.
Oh my God.
Sige. Val, I'll take it from here. Okay, ako muna yung moderator. So, I like this question. I'll pose this question to the two of you. There are a lot of suppliers who claim to be sustainable. Any tips on determining who we can trust? Joni?
Oh, this is actually like, because the boat where basically I help moderate Buhay Zero Waste. So we get this question so many times, multiple times in a day. That's minsan, it's the same brand, it's the same company, it's a different one. So, okay, with who you can trust, basically you have to ask what the ingredients of the thing is, how we're going to manage it, and what to do with it after we buy it. So, for example, a lot of the problems come with, I want to sell, for example, I sell food. So should I shift from, let's say, like a plastic container and choose bagas instead, which is cane? So you also have to understand, okay, yung bibili ba ng containers ko, are they going to compost it? Are they also going to throw it in a manner that, because if ever, they all just end up in the landfill anyway. And once everything is in the landfill, it doesn't matter if it's biodegradable, if it's non-biodegradable, if it's recyclable, non-recyclable. Once it's in the landfill, sama-sama na siya dun, and then it kind of bioaccumulates. So even like, let's say with food waste, once it gets into the landfill, it creates methane, and then you can't turn it into compost anymore. So when it comes to eco-friendly items, it's really making sure that you know what it's made of. So for example, with we have PLA, or it's kind of plastic that's plant-based. We also have to check if we have facilities in the Philippines that are able to break these down, if they're able to turn it into something else, if we're able to, because even if something is eco-friendly, if it ends up in the landfill, wala, sama-sama na lang siya. What I choose, okay, for plastic, para people don't get confused. For OXO biodegradable bags, the first thing I do is I ask them if it's made out of cassava, if it's made out of a plant-based material, if you can compost it at home. If you're able to compost something at home, automatic, that is okay. If you're not able to compost it at home, if it's, there's another biodegradable plastic kasi, I asked someone from a plastic manufacturing company what it actually is. This was a few years back before we had anything online. And they said, basically the oxo-biodegradable ones we have here, we just add an extra chemical so that it breaks down when it comes in contact with oxygen instead of the plastic breaking down because of UV rays. So what happens is your plastic actually turns into microplastic at a much faster rate. So technically it's not eco-friendly, you just don't see it, but the microplastic is around. So if we're going to be choosing sustainable materials, eco-friendly materials, just make sure that they actually are not made out of plastic. So you have to do your research, you have to make sure, and that's really talking to a lot of suppliers, and then doing research outside of that.
Thank you so much for that, Joni, and thank you, Anna, for catching. Thanks always for the partnership. Anna and I have done this before, so we won't be afraid to do it again. Thank you so much, Anna. JM, did you have any inputs for Anna's question a while ago?
Well, just to add to what Joni said, one way that you could verify the material itself is actually to go to the nearest testing lab and ask them to verify the material itself. Or you can actually do simple tests. For example, in plastics, there are simple tests that you can do on, based on toughness, based on hardness, based on even just color. And there are websites that are that give out like the criteria for each material that you have. But to be more secure, I guess, in the knowledge, you can reach out to anyone that could test that material, or even actually run through institutes in the academe that are doing research and development in those materials, and ask them, is this really what it claims to be? Is this really biodegradable or not? What should we really do about it? And then pair it up with the claims of the company.
What I took from what JM Joni said really is to do our due diligence, our part, to do research, to go beyond just checking the labels, but really talking to these people and doing our own research. Anna, this question specifically is for you. Zero waste or more sustainable materials or products are usually more expensive. There is that perception that a zero waste lifestyle is an expensive lifestyle. The question is this true? And how can we work around this? Anna.
This is something that I think about a lot, and I'm sure Joni will jump in after. But it doesn't have to be expensive. For example, we get told to buy a reusable bottle, reusable whatever, bamboo like this. Eh, meron ka namang spoon and fork sa bahay, di ba? So, pwede mo naman yun gamitin kung hindi mo gustong bumili ng... What I'm trying to say is, you don't have to buy things to be sustainable. We have to have a mindset for sustainability and use what we already have. One thing I'm trying to do, not successfully, I'll be honest, is to not shop online for things I don't need. So I'm trying to do less of that this year.
Napapabudol, Anna.
Oh, kaka 99 lang. So, parang, so that's already, by not buying things that you don't need, you're already being sustainable. And I think you also have to think about what for you is sustainability. Just relating it to the question earlier, ano ba for you? How do you define sustainability? How do you find eco-friendly? When you know the answer to that, then you can make better decisions.
It's really a bit more personal, no? Since you're talking about definitions, how we define things, how we see things, will always come from our point of view, from where we are, from our financial privileges or lack thereof also. So there's that as well. We have a lot of interesting questions here lined up because this is a very relevant topic. But I'll head on over to this one since we're in a digital event here. Though we have gone digital for events, deliveries of tokens and gifts or products involve a lot of plastic packaging. And we saw the increase in online deliveries, both in food and in shopping products as well. As event or expo organizers, do you have any tips on how we can lessen the waste generated from these? Any of our speakers can take a jab at this. Do you have volunteers? Maybe let's go with Joni. How has it been so far in terms of this plastic packaging in the midst of a pandemic?
Actually, my partner works an agency. So every time they have an event, may nagpapadala ng food. It's really hard because parang, yun nga, they have to go, sometimes their house may mga nakatira sa Laguna, some live in Cavite, some live all over, and then they're given the same food. You can't naman be like, oh, this person lives here, we'll give them this. Oh, this person lives here, we'll give them something close to their area. Kasi syempre, they want everyone to have the same thing. So I think the easiest was really, okay, let's reduce. One thing we can do is, let's not give them utensils. Oh, let's make sure na it's packed instead in foil. Tapos bahala na sila if they want to wash that foil and include that into their into their bins for segregation. Tapos even food containers, they try to choose biodegradable materials instead. So we'll go with paper, we'll go with something they can reuse. But it's really at this point, it's doing what you can and not punishing yourself also for it. So basically just reduce everything you can, and then if you can't, just sit with it for now, because right now there's very little that we can do when it comes to stuff like that. One nice thing lang is they've also stopped giving away yung mga giveaway items that we might not necessarily use. So pag sila tinatanong sila, what do you need? Are you going to be able to use this? So for example, recently they gave out mga room and linen sprays, which parang the bottle we can reuse din naman. So I think that's a great thing also because it's more inclusive pa rin. So there.
Thank you, Joni. I remember that quote, we don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We just need millions of people doing it imperfectly. JM, any insights to that question a while ago on plastic packaging?
Actually, this made me think about this meeting that I had last month, where we were all scattered across the country, the 30 of us. One even was in like Mindanao. And the only thing that the organizers did for us was that they sent us digital coupons for supposedly coffee and drinks, because that was the only thing that we really needed. And that was already effective because you could just run through the nearest coffee shop and get it yourself, or if you really want it, or if not, if you could save it for a rainy day. And that's already cost effective. At the same time, that's literally zero waste on the part of the organizers. You make the participants, or create the power of for the participants to decide on whether or not they could use that in your meetings or events.
Thank you for that, JM. Anna?
For me, so I definitely agree with everything that Joni and JM have said. If it's unavoidable, like me, if I get a lot of stuff in, let's say, bubble wrap, I collect the bubble wrap. And then if I can reuse it, then I will. But if not, then I'll bring it to a waste aggregator or like a plastic recycler. If you ask me to choose between like paper-based packaging and plastic, those microwavable food containers, I actually prefer the microwavable food containers because one, they're reusable, two, they're recyclable, and the junk shops actually like receiving it. Pero yung paper-based packaging, may lining siya ng plastic, so it's actually not recyclable. So between those two types of packaging, may mga ganong considerations kasi na hindi naman palagi nating ine-equate na paper equals better. So you have to ask those questions also and do your own research.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add, because a lot of people have been shifting, even some of groceries, which is why we really have to just bring our own bags. So a lot of there's a shift na, okay, let's use paper, let's use bamboo instead, let's use this. But paper actually has a bigger carbon footprint when it comes to production as opposed to plastic. Yes, it is biodegradable, but then how do you grow they come from trees, you have to grow it. It takes years before you're able to turn it into actual paper. And then there's the production of the paper. So ang laki-laki ng carbon footprint niya for something that you'll also just use once. And then it doesn't help when it's contaminated with food, you can't recycle it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, JM, go ahead.
Sorry, I just think to add to that there was a study conducted for a global coffee chain where apparently 1% of global wastes come from coffee cups, and coffee cups, as we all know, come from paper-based packaging. So that in itself is already a big impact if we use paper-based packaging, since because of its composition with paper and then your plastic lining, not really the best way to go there. So always think reusable. Always think if you could repurpose something if you're no longer going to use it, and then lastly, you think about recycling it. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, JM. I'm listening to these three brilliant panelists right now, and I can't help but think, okay, it makes me feel like a normal, no, I wouldn't say a normal person, but any person would listen who has not been introduced to the zero waste lifestyle, correct? Any person listening to this who has not been introduced to that would be like stuck in a rock in the hard place. Like, okay, bawal plastic, okay, bawal paper. So like, I'm getting confused now. I'm getting so scared. It's going to be a bit challenging. Where do I start? Where do I begin? Like, okay, lahat naman pala bawal. All these are like scary, but I want to do it. So where can I begin? Where can I start?
Okay, do I start? And this is for like general, doesn't matter where you're going to start. So basically the sustainability journey, the reason why it's called a journey is because we have a different starting point for each person. For example, if I cook a lot, if I'm the one in charge of making our meals, let's say, like the question kanina, a lot of people saying, oh, the zero waste lifestyle is expensive. What I teach in low income communities, they're actually the most capable because they're the ones with access to palenques, where everything is package free. They just bring their own containers. So if you have access to that, you can start with that. And then from there, you can start composting. From composting, you can start growing your own food. And then when you start growing your own food, because you need plant beds, you can start collecting all of your plastic waste, put them into bottles, turn them into eco bricks, and then you can have a plastic plant bed that you made yourself from your waste. You can start from there. You can also start from, let's say, toiletries. Like, oh, my toothbrush is sira na. Okay, time to shift to a bamboo toothbrush. And then the only waste you produce are the bristles, which you can also put in your eco brick. You can also start with, for example, the easiest could also be, starting today, I'm never going to use a plastic bottle ever again. So for example, in low-income communities, I tell them one bottle of water, that's 20 pesos. Multiply that by 365 days in a year. Magkano na yung naipon mo, tapos it's 365 bottles pa na wala na sa landfill. You can also do that with plastic utensils. So it's really up to you where you start, but you have to start with one and then turn it into a habit and then add another thing. Because if you do it all together at once, parang it's intimidating. And then when you fail at one thing, I don't want to do this anymore, it sucks. So it's really start with one, turn it into a habit, and then add more in the long. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to end up in the same place anyway.
I love that. I love how it's framed as a journey. We have different starting points. Anna, how about for you?
I'll echo what Joni said, but also my mindset is aim for progress, not perfection. Every year, I make what I call an a reuse solution. Diba? Pag New Year, meron kang resolution. So in SPS, we started reuse solution. What's one thing you're going to do this year? So a few years ago, mine was to start composting at home, and which is already a lot of commitment. And then my reuse solution a couple of years ago was to switch to menstrual cups. This year, it's to buy less. So yun yung commitment ko, and then I just do it as well as I possibly can, and then dadagdag ako the year after.
Interesting. Reuse solution. I should do that because I never follow my resolutions. Baka naman may motivation kung reuse solutions yung framing natin. I think it was mentioned by JM kanina din and also Anna now. It's quantifying what a Joni rather. Quantifying what the benefits of a zero waste lifestyle. Like sabi ni Joni kanina, how much is a water bottle, and then you multiply that across the years that you're using it. I think it's important for people to recognize and see the the price of a zero waste lifestyle, the price that you get to save the costs you save in terms of a zero waste lifestyle. JM, how about you?
I'm gonna frame it similar to what Joni said earlier.
Yeah.
Just look at your room first. See, what's in it, and see what are things that you use every day, and see what consider as waste every day. And then, gather them all up, read up on how to properly dispose it, and by properly, explore the alternatives and not just put it in a plastic bag and then send it to the landfill. And then from there you can build it up, day after day after day. Progress is gradual and not supposed to be all of a sudden. And then eventually, like a sustainable journey, if you will. You look at the past and your previous practices, you compare it today, and you're going to be amazed that you've gone a lot, way different from your previous practices. It could be as simple as that.
I'm getting so much from this discussion right now, and as we approach the last few minutes of our panel discussion, I think a recurring takeaway or insight that's happening is, sabi ni Anna, win in inches, aim for progress and not perfection. And it's a lot about, for example, fitness. For example, you don't see the effects of it right away. You have to be consistent. You have to see the small wins in your fitness journey, and it's the same in a zero waste journey. And I think that is what's resonating with what Anna, JM, and Joni are trying to say right now. Let's talk about face shields and face masks. The very important and useful face shield that only the Philippines is using. Now, I'm just kidding. I don't want to be political, but everything is political. Now, how could we, since we're here already, I'm sorry. How could we properly dispose, or what can we do with used face shields and face masks? Since we're still here, might as well do something about it. Anybody can just take a jab at this question.
I'm going to pick up on what you said. Waste management has to be political because our government is mandated to fulfill this civic duty. Okay, so we can't escape talking about politics and waste. But anyway, we lack medical waste facilities in the Philippines. It's been our problem since forever. I'm also sobrang laki ng difference between how much waste we're producing, how much medical waste we're producing, and yung facilities natin to process. I read a guideline na the best way right now is to, when you remove your mask, put it wrap it in tissue, and then as much as possible, have a separate container for it. Yung face shields, ewan ko. Sige, take it away, other people. Joni and JM.
I love it. Kasi ewan ko talaga. Oh, JM, go ahead.
Ewan ko talaga.
Okay. Actually, if you look at our current laws and statutes, face shields and face masks are covered by the Hazardous Waste Act. There is a provision in the law that says it's classified under hospital waste. And yes, I agree with Anna that because of what's happening in the pandemic, we're basically beyond tipping point right now when it comes to this. Now, it's very interesting because there's a study, or there was actually a commentary by a chemistry journal, that says that plastics would allow COVID-19 to stay, embedded for as long as like 2 to 3 days. And I was surprised because we're using face shields, which is basically, plastics in it. So this is a challenge for policymakers and for people that are directly involved as stakeholders in this enterprise. And yeah, if you really want to follow the spirit of the law for hazardous waste, you really have to separate your face shields and face masks, and label it as such. And hopefully, you could find someone that could haul it away, that's qualified under the law. So, for residential use, the face mask, it's utter. That's basically it.
Yeah. Thank you, Joni. Yeah, actually, it's a challenge for our policymakers to listen to the science. I think that has been the challenge ever since. Joni,
eto na lang. Since we're not really sure of how to dispose of it, what I do is I make sure that I take care of my face shield. Siguro sa nakabali ako, like, diba the flimsy ones, they break so fast. The acetate ones, because I was like magasam. Not acetate, the hard ones naman. Parang I can't see where I'm stepping, so I have to go like this to see kung malalaglag ba ako ng stair. So I have the really flimsy one. So after every time I use it, I just roll it up again. And then I have like parang this old sunglasses case where I put kasi yun yung nababali eh, that thing. So I always just keep it. I make sure that I don't break it. And then for everything else, basically bumabawi ako. So our solid waste has gone up by 30% because of this pandemic, both for hospital waste and for residential waste, because of food packaging, because of what do you call this, online shopping. So what parang our job as madlang people is to make sure that we make way for medical waste and that we make way for waste that we cannot do anything about. So to give way for that, we have to reduce other waste. Para may allocated na allotment for other wastes na, yun nga, like, hindi natin ang gagawin sa kanya at the moment.
Bawian. Oo. Bawian nga talaga. Babawi. Babawi tayo sa 2022. Di ba, guys? All right. So, we are closing in on our panel discussion, and this has been very fun and very insightful. We have tons of questions that I wish I could ask our speakers, but because we don't have the luxury of time, our organizers have compiled these questions, and we will make sure to send them in to our speakers so that they can attempt to also answer these very interesting questions. I'm sure our panelists have so much to say about this, but I would just love to end this panel discussion with a statement from each and every one of our panelists this morning on their motivation. Like lots of the decisions that we make are really founded on our intentions and our motivations. I think it would be useful for our listeners and valuable for our audiences right now to know what motivated you to make a switch to a zero waste lifestyle. Let's begin with Joni.
Mine started when I was actually 13. This was back in 2003. I was on the science club from 4th grade to 4th year high school. I loved going to the beach. I grew up by the beach. I grew up in Calatagan, Batangas. I loved climbing mountains. I loved animals. Tapos when I was 13, we had a science teacher who would just give random facts before class. Oh, did you know the spider's blood is blue? Okay, start class. And there was one class na she said, did you know, and this was back when the Pasig River was black, sludgy, sobrang baho, stagnant. And she goes, did you know 8% of trash in the Pasig River consists of straws? Okay, start class. And that stuck with me. Na parang, wait, 8%? That's a lot. Imagine if everyone stopped using plastic straws, that would be 8% less. So I think that was the first time that I realized, hey, collective effort matters. So that was my starting point.
Thank you, Joni, for taking us back to that place. JM, what was your motivation?
Actually, I'm trying to find that specific quote that would serve as my motivation, and here it is. Because my background in my undergrad is in chemistry, so I'm going to quote the chemist. His name's Mont Arrhenius, the one that actually first proposed about the link between human-induced activities and global warming, where he said in 1925, humanity stands before a great problem of finding new raw materials and new sources of energy that shall never become extinguished. In the meantime, we must not waste what we have, but must leave as much as possible for future or coming generations. So being sustainable in all means is my motivation.
Thank you so much for that. Chemistry, that's nice. Putting in the science into a more sustainable perspective. No, Anna, what are your closing statements? And tell us what keeps you going in this journey?
My motivation is that I love this country, and I've always been proud to be Filipino, even when times when it's not the best time to be a Filipino. I love this country, and the way that I can show my love for this country is to do something. And when people ask me, don't you ever feel hopeless? And of course there are times when it's hard, but the way that I counteract hopelessness or helplessness is to do something. And if that means if that means reusing something or bringing my waste to a waste aggregator or switching to menstrual cup, even if it's just one thing, then it's something I can be proud of and say that I'm doing this for something bigger than myself. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Incredible, Anna, JM, Joni. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure our audiences learned a lot for our panel discussion this morning. Ang masasabi ko lang po ay ang dami ko pong baon from this morning's webinar. Hindi na po ako kailangan mag-lunch para din maka-help sa diet ko. We now have a wealth of information about producing zero waste events and approaching a more zero waste lifestyle thanks to our panelists and our speakers. Thank you very much, Anna, JM, and Joni. And of course, to our keynote speaker a while ago, Ms. Akira, maraming salamat po. Now, we would like to ask our participants in Hop-In and over there at our Facebook live stream, what was your favorite key takeaway? Please answer our poll. They will pop up on your screen right there. Or you can just comment them on our Facebook live streams. Gusto namin malaman ano yung pinaka-paborito nyong takeaway from this 2-hour webinar, which, if I had a choice, I'd have so many takeaways. Is it A, learning from Kamikatsu Town and how its community helped one another? Or is your favorite takeaway would be the simple things that you can do for an eco-friendly event? Or is your favorite segment or takeaway the experience of our zero waste champion panelists? Have them in, answer our poll, or you can comment your favorite takeaways in our Facebook live stream, and we would love to hear your testimonies and key takeaways and favorite insights so that we can document them and really show to the world that, hey, zero waste lifestyle is the way to go. Yeah, we're seeing answers and the Hop-In, and we are seeing participation as well on our Facebook and our Hop-In. Maraming salamat po, and we'll take note of these takeaways and we'll share them with our different networks and stakeholders. Well, now that signifies the end of our webinar. Maraming salamat sa lahat for just, showing up. It's a Saturday morning. You could have been elsewhere doing other things, like texting your ex. I'm kidding. But you chose to be with us, and that is such a big deal. Consider this the first step of your journey, if you have not yet taken that step, to be more environmentally conscious and wary about everything related to sustainable consumption. We may have reached the end of our webinar, but this is only just the beginning of our desire to be strong advocates and on-ground volunteers for climate action, environmental sustainability, biodiversity conservation. It really cuts across a lot of other issues. I will never get tired of saying this, mga kapatid. We only have one planet. There is no planet B. We owe it to ourselves, our community, and to the generations that will come after us to give them a planet worth living in. Because at the end of the day, so many lives are at stake whose future are in the hands of people like you and I. My name is Val Bastille. Thank you once again for being here in the webinar organized by CITEM in preparation for SSX. Stay safe, follow safety protocol, get vaccinated, drink water, hold government officials to account, and tell them, the people closest to you, that you love them so much. Maraming salamat po. Good morning.